stopping by for another episode of MFA Writers. It's now the end of February, and that means AWP is just around the corner. If you don't know what that is, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs Conference is the biggest conference in the country related to creative writing and creative writing programs. This year, it's in Seattle from March 8th to the 11th. It's a great place to catch your favorite writer giving a talk and to learn about various MFA programs. Our guest today, Reid, will be participating in a panel called Writing the Land on March 10th from 1:45 to 3 p.m., so make sure to check that out if you're there. And I'll be there all weekend, wandering around enjoying myself. So if you see me, be sure to say hello. In the meantime, you can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/MFAWriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Reid. Erica is a poet who lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, and recently earned her MFA at Western Colorado University, where she served as assistant editor of Think Journal. In 2022, she was nominated for Best New Poets. In 2021, her poetry won the Yellowwood Poetry Prize in the Helen Shubley Sonnet Contest in the Modern Sonnets category. In addition, she was nominated for a Pushcart Prize and was commissioned by the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra. Today, she has brought 3 poems to read for us.
Thank you. I'll start with The Silences for conductor Louis Longray. Before the orchestra begins its trek, the maestro stops to calibrate our ears. This is familiar music, and he fears we'll listen to the notes but skip clean past the silences. There are 2 types of quiet. The flat, dead ring of nothing, we now hear this, and one with a voice of fire. Violins, upon his cue, sustain a simple chord, then gently taper off until the vast and vaulted auditorium's a riot of all the sound unplayed, as bright as citrus. Wild space between this feeling and the next. He turns, they play, a suite we've heard before, made twice as bold by all its raucous silence. This is 5-story house. Ground. Everything begins, somehow. I wish I could remember the moment before I began to hurt this way. There was a time when my body held no secrets. How did my blood move through me in those days? My guess is, easily, without a second thought. Second, I have never had a bedroom at my father's house. For a time, before he remarried, he laid a mattress on the floor, and it was mine. When he built his own house, it had a room for my brother, another for my sister, another for my stepmom's treadmill. Third, yesterday I had a waking dream in which my inner child had untethered herself from me like an astronaut abandoning her spacewalk, floating adrift. If she feels that way now, I felt that way back then. I can remember if I close my eyes. I try not to close my eyes. Fourth, I tell my husband I want my own bedroom, and he laughs, not unkindly. He knows I ache for a space no one can take from me, I would accept my own mattress on the floor. We compromise. I choose new pillows, and on Mondays I sleep alone on the couch. Rooftop. I believed I'd see clearly from here. Have I not climbed high enough yet? Am I not far from being a child? Inside, my blood gets stuck in old places. I have never felt new. I keep angling for a glimpse of my whole self, but all the taller houses block the view. This is Nocturne after Kelly Weber. There are things I can only say at night. I hang a dinner plate for a moon. Soon morning will crack my illusion with her broken fingers. I call this ritual. Kelly says we don't owe anyone anything. Still, I was swaddled into a world of owing. There is a tooth in the word indentured, contracts ripped ragged. When I ripped my mother open, our contracts matched. That was that. My life borrowed against before I knew how to bat my eyes. This porcelain moon won't pull a tide. Nothing shifts inside me. Waves lap a concrete shore. If anything green sprouts through the cracks, salt water takes it back. To grow would be to mother. My body snaps vines like fingers, hemlock and cement. Once I met a church. His doors were wide open. He said, "You don't owe anyone anything." Doors wide like traps. I need to understand the economy, the rate of exchange. My worth is asleep under a blanket strewn with teeth. If I move, I'll break a smile across this floor. Hunger is different from emptiness. There are things I can only want at night. And here comes a new day's light, crooked at each knuckle.
Erica, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for reading it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm a big fan.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you because you are a member of a seemingly shrinking group of writers, and that is the formal poets. You told me that you predominantly write in forums, and I want to hear about this. Have you always enjoyed writing in forums, or is there a moment when you remember trying them for the first time and getting hooked?
Oh, first off, I want to push back on the idea that it is a shrinking category. I just think that the way we're thinking about formalism is changing, because I think that you will find a lot of writers who are writing in more contemporary forms, like Terrence Hayes' Pechakucha form, which is sort of a prose hybrid. I think a lot of actually hybrid work I would consider formalist. So if you are talking about the group of writers who are writing in strict Spencerian sonnets, yes, you are correct. It is a shrinking group. But I think that there, just as there always have been, I think there's a huge swath of poets who are drawn to some kind of constraint, some kind of formal property in their writing. It's just not the buttoned up, stuffy kind of formal poetry that I think most people think of when they think of form. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is totally fair to say. Most of the poets I know are playing around with form. Actually, when I wrote that question, I put shrinking group in quotation marks because I was kind of joking a little bit. But there are poets out there who really are like not interested in writing in form at all. And that seems to be like a slight change from in the past where forms were like embraced more, I guess.
For sure. And I think the other thing we have to consider is there is also a shrinking group of people reading form. So a lot of times the work that I am submitting, I consider formalist in nature, and people aren't necessarily even reading it on that level. They might not recognize it is a sonnet if it isn't rhymed or things like that. Mm-hmm. And right. So that can be sort of a challenge. I constantly run into people, writers, who cannot find a way to make constraints feel generative. I sort of feel it's a way you're wired to a certain point. I think there are people who find that restriction freeing. And I am one of those people. It almost, sounds oxymoronic, but I am one of those people for whom that is true. I need a constraint. I feel like sitting down to write a poem feels like floating in the middle of the ocean. It is too open. It's way too open. It's terrifying, honestly. And so I find any kind of constraint really helps me enter the poem. The reason that I chose to read the 5-story house poem is because I consider that a sort of formal structure. I had this idea. It began actually with the image of an elevator. I wanted to write a poem that was each floor of the elevator. And that was a constraint in and of itself. And that was something that sort of nudged me into thinking about those floors in a different way. And so while it's a nonce form, it's something I just invented. It is a formal principle that helped me enter into the poem. And that poem it surprised me. It was interesting to me to write it because in trying to complete the challenge of the form I had set for myself, I found things I never set out to write about. And that is the only way I know how to write the kind of poem that surprises me as a writer.
Yeah. I took one poetry workshop when I was in my MFA. I'm a fiction writer. But I had heard a lot of fiction writers say that they had taken poetry workshops and it had really improved their prose. So I was curious to do it. I took this workshop not knowing when I signed up that it was a formal poetry class. And when I found out, I was so nervous. I'm like, how am I going to do this? Like I was expecting to just write prose poetry, right? I was going to take the easy route. But it was a strange thing that happened. And it's kind of what you're talking about, which was being forced to write in a form actually freed me up in some way. I wasn't overthinking the writing anymore. I wasn't overthinking the fact that I was writing poetry, and I was just trying to take what was coming to me language wise. And it turned out that some of those forms that I wrote in, I wrote some duplexes that were way better than some of the prose poetry that I also wrote while I was in the workshop.
Yeah, I'm really glad you had that experience. And I wish everyone would at least try it. A lot of times I recommend that people write in form just to get the poem started. For me, I've never written a pantoum that I liked. If you don't know the form, it repeats lines over and over. And I've tried it a number of times. And in the failure of that poem, I have always come across something interesting that I like, a thread I would like to follow. And it didn't end up being in a pantoum, and it probably didn't end up in a formal structure at all. But that constraint and that repetition and, knowing where I was going to have to go next for the next line got me to the place where I was in that sort of logic puzzle part of my brain, got me to a piece of surprising language that I could then step out of that pantoum and make it into something that was working. I think that it can be even just a way to begin, which is, one of the hardest parts of writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in fiction, often I'm just looking for a seed, a way into the story. And then the finished product often is nothing like that original seed, but it's just a way to get started, a way into it.
I think that's so valid, and it's one of the biggest challenges we have. And I find it just as challenging to write in form sometimes as anybody else. But if it gets me started somewhere, it's worth the time, and it provides some guidance right from the beginning, even if you don't end up following it through.
Well, it's no surprise then that your thesis, which you wrote during your MFA, utilized formal poetry. You told me that the heart of that thesis was a sonnet crown. For those who don't know, can you tell us what a sonnet crown is and why you chose to use that for your thesis?
Yes, absolutely. A sonnet crown is a series of sonnets that are linked. Traditionally, the last line of the first sonnet becomes the first line of the second sonnet. That's really the whole rule. There's also, you can write a heroic crown where there is a 15th sonnet. These sequences are usually written in either 7 or 14, and you can have a 15th sonnet which uses all the final lines of those 14 sonnets to make a new sonnet. I did not do that. Just as a little piece of education, that's an option for you. I did not do that. It came about in a really interesting way, actually. In class, we had a narrative writing course, a narrative poetry course. And the culminating project of that course was a long narrative poem, something like 150 lines. I think it has changed over the years, but a longer poem than most of us are used to writing. So I had this idea that I've been wanting for a long time to try a sonnet crown. A sonnet is a form I love very much. And I'd been wanting to try a crown, and it's just such a huge undertaking. And so I thought, maybe I can use this for this assignment. And I talked to my instructor, Dr. Tyson Hausdorfer, and I said, this is a project I'd like to take on, and I will make this narrative. Can I use this for this assignment? And he said, absolutely. And so what I ended up doing, my thesis all centers around my dissolving relationship with my mother. So one of the things that I noticed about approaching this content through the sonnet crown form was that it gave me a playbook. I knew I was going to be dividing the story into these 14 sections. I knew they were going to link. And it just really helped me divide that project into something that really excited me. And again, I found a lot of surprise along the way. In following the form, it took me to new memories. It took me to it ended up being a really empathetic piece, where instead of just complaining about how I don't get along with my mother, it became an exploration of how did we get here?
Right.
And that linking, I think it was the linking between sonnets that made me sort of say, okay, we've told this story. What happened before that?
Right.
What happened after that? How were these arguments related? How did this all culminate in a relationship that fell apart? And I feel like using the sonnet crown as the undergirding for that story benefited me as a writer, and I think it just makes the piece cohere as a reader.
It's always so interesting to see the ways in which content instructs form and form instructs content, and how that's such a fluid relationship when you start a piece.
Yes, I think that we are so full of potential for wild and surprising thoughts. And my very favorite part of writing is discovering something that's in my own mind that I had no idea was there. And I find these sort of formal approaches to be the best way to find those things. I don't respond well to prompts, because if you tell me, write a poem about your relationship with your mother, or write a poem about what you see out of the window, I always tend to write something very expected. But if it has to fit this thing, or it has to rhyme here, or it has to follow a meter, or it has to have a syllable count, or it doesn't use the letter W, whatever that constraint is, really helps me get to the parts of my mind that surprise me and just delight myself as a reader of my own work. And they tend to be the pieces that other people respond to the most.
Well, you graduated last May, and so I'm curious to hear what the last few months have been like, having finished the MFA. Has your writing process changed at all since then? Has your writing practice changed at all? What's this time been like for you?
That's a great question. And I still feel like I'm in a refractory period. I still feel like a recovering student. I don't feel like I'm fully out in the world yet, if that makes any sense. I gave myself the challenge in the past few months to try to work on my writing as hard as I did when I was in school. I did school and a job at the same time. And I found the time, I found the energy, I found the focus to do that for 2 years. And so afterwards, my biggest focus has been not to lose that momentum, So I've been really trying to put as much energy as I did into school, into my own writing now, into submitting that manuscript, into submitting individual poems. I am an assistant editor at a journal. I run a sort of support group for people submitting poems. I am involved. I'm trying to teach workshops, all these sorts of writing life things that I'm trying to cobble together. I'm trying to give it as much love as I did during school. I'm not good at giving myself breaks, so I don't necessarily recommend the approach that I am taking. All I know is I will never have more momentum than I do coming out of school. And so I'm just trying to use that for now. How it translates into a longer term practice, I am slightly anxious to see. I am very externally motivated. I like deadlines. I like grades.
Right.
I like assignments. I like all of that. So I'm trying to see how I can structure my life where that sense of urgency is still present, but it's something that I can maintain and sustain in my life.
Yeah, I also graduated in May, so we're going through similar things right now, figuring out that post-MFA life. It's a tricky transition. It's been trickier than I thought it would be. Like in some ways, I wanted to keep the momentum going, like you're saying, but then in other ways, I felt quite burnt out by the end of my MFA program. So I also felt like I needed a bit of a break from it, like a mental break from it. So it's been a bit of a challenge to like simultaneously take some time off when I need it and know that that's okay now, and then also try to keep, a daily practice going.
I'll be honest. I'm afraid to stop. I'm afraid to stop pushing. I'm afraid to take a break. Following my undergrad, I took a break from poetry, and it turned into not writing poetry. And I'm trying not to repeat that mistake, but there has to be a middle ground between the way that I'm pushing now and the way that someone who writes for their entire life can sustain that energy. And I just haven't found it yet, but I'm trying to be very honest with you because like you said, there is this feeling. It's a very tricky thing to navigate and people do it very differently. My way is to just chew it up and spit it out as much as I can.
Well, I think it's cool that you're continuing to do literary activities like working for a magazine, trying to teach some workshops, things like that. I know during your MFA program, you had the opportunity to be an assistant editor of Think Journal. What was that experience like? What's the experience been like at the journal you're working for now? What has it done for your own writing? So
Think Journal is a formal leaning journal. So you will find a lot of things that are, a lot of the poetry is metrical or using these received forms we're talking about, but largely we just require that there is some kind of organizing principle. I think that's a great way to think about formal writing is there an organizing principle that is clear to the reader? So I started reading there while I was in the MFA. I am still reading there. But the connection, Think used to be affiliated with Western Colorado University. It is now independent, but there's a really good relationship there. And because I came to Western so hungry for formalism, they made this connection and it has really sort of helped bolster my own exposure to today's formal writing. Honestly, the biggest way that assisting with editing in a journal has changed my own practice has been in my approach to submitting my own work. I talk about this a lot to anybody who will listen because the submission process is so rigorous and heartbreaking and exhausting and time consuming. But working with a journal really showed me how impersonal these decisions are. Nobody is reading your poem and, making fun of you or disliking you. Nobody is reading your cover letter and saying, well, the poem is great, but this guy sounds like a jerk. Nobody is making those decisions on a personal basis. Everything is entirely about the quality of the journal, and not even the quality of the journal, but the balance of the journal. For instance, we may just have too many sonnets in this issue.
Right.
And so perfectly good sonnets that may have been accepted in the spring are rejected in the fall. And once I learned that and saw that for myself, that quality of work is incredibly important. It's the utmost important thing in these decisions, but that there are so many other factors at play that you as a writer will never hear about, have no idea about, and they have nothing to do with your value or even necessarily the quality of your work. That has made me restructure the way I think about submission. I won't say it doesn't sting. I don't take it as personally. I get back on the horse a little bit faster. I know that just because a piece has been rejected doesn't mean that it won't fit somewhere else, doesn't mean that it won't find its home somewhere where the timing is right and the balance is right. And so that took me, a few issues to really see how the rhythm of a journal works like that. And I think it really helped me build that callus that we sort of have to build if we're going to be relentless about getting our work out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people the same thing, that one of the best experiences I had during the MFA was working at New Letters magazine and getting to read submissions and understand just the number of submissions that are coming in, the amount of time that readers are spending like going through story after story, and just how impersonal, like you say, the decisions are, and how factors that determine what gets published are often not related to the story itself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once you see that, you can kind of divorce your emotion from it a bit.
Right.
Again, in the interest of complete transparency, of course, it just always hurts. That never completely stops, but you can change it into just sort of like, I don't know, a disappointment instead of a personal indictment of the soul, which I think sometimes it can be so linked. I mean, it's your work, it's so personal, but these decisions aren't. And if you can take it from being a rejection of the self to a rejection of this piece at this time in this circumstance, it's a little bit easier to deal with in the long run.
Okay, so good for listeners to know that Think Journal is no longer directly associated with Western Colorado's MFA program. But it sounds like if listeners end up going to Western Colorado, there maybe is opportunity there to work at that magazine if they want it.
Yes. For one thing, I would say it comes down to the faculty. The faculty are really passionate about really making whatever you're interested in happen. And so this connection to Think came from somebody saying, it would be really useful for you, Erica Reid, individually. This would be perfect for you. However, there's the graduate program for creative writing has 5 cohorts. Another one of them outside of poetry is nature writing. A lot of those students do an internship or a term with High Desert Journal or other nature writing specific journals that the faculty have connections with. They, all of them are also on the boards of these journals or editing for these journals. And there are a lot of personal connections being made. So even if there is not a journal directly connected to this or any, I would say, MFA program, the faculty are always really happy to make the connection for you. And every journal is looking for readers. Right. It's a volunteer gig. It takes tons of time. You're reading things of all kinds of quality. They're always looking for people. So I would say, feel free to knock on that door yourself, but your faculty can certainly put in a word for you. And at Western, it's a big focus of just making those connections as students want them.
Well, let's talk some more about the low residency program at Western Colorado. The graduate program in creative writing, as they call it, offers 5 areas of study: genre fiction, nature writing, as you mentioned, poetry, publishing, and screenwriting. According to the website, students work closely with faculty and fellow students through video conferencing and online classes during the year, and then attend a week-long residency at Western Colorado University each July. So let's start first with how you got there. You took 15 years between undergrad and the MFA. What made you want to go back to school and do this?
Oh, I wanted to go back to school the whole time. I want to be in school forever. If you find a way to do that, let me know. But after school, I had loans and I got a job and I started my career. I work in marketing. I started off in ad agencies. I now work for arts organizations and nonprofits in a marketing and writing capacity. And it's sort of one of those things where 15 years happen in a blink of an eye. And along the way, as I mentioned, I was writing poetry less. And so my confidence in who I was as a poet also declined. I kept expecting it to sort of go away. I kept expecting it to say, like, well, writing was once a part of my life, and now it's just something I do for work. That never happened. I think, it was a good test of that, of whether it was really in me. That drive never went away. And one night, literally, I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, I wonder if there are any programs focused on formalism, because that's something that was interesting to me. Now, Western's program used to do that. When I applied, it was called Poetry with an Emphasis on Verse Craft. And I applied and was accepted and freaked out and deferred it. Again, I listened to a lot of these interviews, Jared, and everybody seems so polished and so, they know how to research a program, and they seem to be so, just put together in their approach to their lives. Not me. So I freaked out. I deferred the program. I had just moved to Colorado. There was too much stuff going on at once. I was starting a new job and what have you. The kick that I needed was when the pandemic started. As I mentioned, I work in marketing for arts organizations. And when the pandemic, when it proved it was going to be a thing, all of my clients, all my freelance clients were gone because there were no arts to promote. And I found myself suddenly incredibly underemployed and looking, I could not just sit around doing nothing. I needed some fulfillment. I needed some purpose. I reached back out to Western and I said, I know it's close. The terms start in the summer with that first residency. I know we're getting close, but would you consider me? And they said, absolutely. And I got started that way.
Well, I also took nearly 10 years off, I guess, between my undergrad and going back for the MFA. And yeah, it is surprising how quickly that time goes by.
It really does. But I will say, I worried that those 15 years were going to be a problem. I worried that the right thing to do was to go straight from undergrad into grad, what have you. I always worry that there's a right thing to do. Right, yeah. And I'm not doing it. But when I got there, everybody was in different stages of their life. There were students who were retired. There were students who were starting their families. And so a low residency program worked well for them. There were everybody was in a different place. And I ended up feeling in my writing like that break was really, really important. I had lived some life. And I could tell when I came back to my writing that I had some content. I had some things I needed to process. I needed to explore. I needed to work through that came from those 15 years. There are people in the program for whom this is a second focus in their life. They spent in their entire professional career, studying or teaching X, and are now coming to something that they love at age 55, 60, what have you. I don't think there's a wrong way to do this. And I think especially a low residency program like the one I took is flexible for people who might have a non-traditional path to grad school.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that there is no right or wrong way to do this. The diversity of experiences in my MFA program were really amazing. People who went straight from undergrad into the MFA program and people who had been out of school for much longer than you or I. And you mentioned that you worked full-time throughout the program, which I imagine is one of the reasons why you chose the low residency route. What was that like, and what advice do you have for listeners who might be considering doing something similar?
So right around the time that I was committing, well, at least beginning the MFA program, I was not convinced I could hack it. Right around the time of beginning the program, I also had a freelance client of mine who wanted me to come on board, basically, and it was a great opportunity. And I was just very open with them and said, I would love to work with you. It would keep me from chasing freelance clients while I'm doing school and everything. But I want you to know I'm doing school. Is there something we can work out here? And I ended up working for them 3/4 time, just, a little bit less so that I had something left at the end of the day to give to school. Classes are in the evening. And really the only advice I could give was to be completely transparent about that. I think if I was trying to have this hidden second moonlighting situation, I think it would have been really difficult. Instead, I had a really accepting and understanding boss who would say things like, feel free to take a personal day, not for a reason, but just to catch up in your brain, because I know you're juggling a lot. And that was really wonderful to hear. And similarly, I had support at school because they're used to people trying to juggle, again, either raising a family or keeping a career or both at the same time. So I just tried to be really transparent with both parties about what was going on, especially when there were times when things got really frantic. As you know, at the end of semesters and all those there are times you can predict that things are going to be busy and really taxing. It ended up being less a matter of time and more a matter of how much energy, creative energy, could I expend in a day. But I've really discovered how much I could take on and how much I could really achieve. I wouldn't want to keep up that energy forever, but I think that people who are doing their graduate school in person and teaching, for their fellowships and things like that probably feel the same way. I mean, you spend a really intense couple of years and you know that at some point there's going to be a new normal. And for right now, this is something we're getting through because we're really passionate about it.
Well, in the program, in a low-res program, you have the residencies and then you have your time outside of the residencies. And I was wanting to talk to you about what each of those things looks like. Let's start with your time outside of the residency. So the website mentions video conferencing and online courses. Could you walk us through what a typical week looks like and how much you're working closely with the faculty members?
Sure. So the way that it was structured for my program, I was taking it full time. You can take the program half time, which would be like one class per semester. I took it full time, which is 2 classes per semester. And so essentially you have one Zoom class for each of those in a week. They would be 2 or 2.5 hours. And you would have that time with your cohort and with the faculty member. And then you would do your work asynchronously through something like Canvas. At Western, there really was a focus on being together in the only way we could be together, which was over Zoom. It was actually really nice during the pandemic because while a lot of schools were trying to figure out how to offer things online, Western, that's how they do it. Right. So there was really no pivoting for that, except for the first summer residency had to be online. And there was some figuring out what that looked like. But yes, we meet just like you might for a class over Zoom and then work asynchronously through a syllabus.
And then what about the residencies? It sounds like at Western Colorado, those take place in the summer. What are those experiences like?
They're incredible. The residencies are incredible. I do lament that my first one was online, but that's just the nature of the timing. But they're in Gunnison, Colorado, which is on the western slope of the state. It is in the mountains. It is completely gorgeous, even in the summer. It's somewhere people go like to ski in the winter, but in the summer, it's really beautiful and a mountain biking paradise and a wildflower lakes, you name it. It's really idyllic. It's a small campus. And during the summer, there's nobody there but us, but our cohorts. And one of the things that's really interesting, you mentioned about the 5 concentrations of the graduate program. They have a real focus during the residencies of cross-pollinating us so that, we meet the larger graduate program student body and get a chance to, meet and talk to them and make friends with them. But also even the faculty, they have something where like every morning of the residency, one of the faculty members gives a craft talk, and they're across the concentrations. So you might hear a craft talk that's about screenwriting, for instance, and some things that any writer can learn about the screenwriting process to help their craft. So you really get a wider view of a literary landscape through that cross-pollination. And I think it's something that's really special about Western. It's something I really valued. And something that I think they're putting more focus on post-COVID, like more than ever, is that the residencies, you have classes, you are earning credits. They are an important part of your graduate experience, but they're really putting a lot of focus on hanging out, being in space with each other, having bonfires and lunches together, and having group classes that invite anyone who's interested, not just the poets, for instance. And that sense of space together when it's not usually how you get to spend your time with your cohort is really valuable. So we do have classes and they're always really interesting, but more and more the focus has been on how do we meet each other as people? And they become really, that sort of summer camp for writers feeling. It has that vibe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that one thing that people are sometimes nervous about with low-res programs is that they might not as easily find that sense of community amongst the cohort. So it sounds like Western is aware of that and is making efforts to give the students a chance to get to know each other well.
Yes, that goes beyond the residencies. The residencies are sort of the clencher for it. They really bring it all together. They're really more of a culminating experience. But throughout the year, there are also poetry readings and sort of online social events to try to keep everybody connected. And they like to make sure that the first year students are meeting the second year students, and just everybody's meeting each other in different ways. And so you definitely do feel like you've got your cohort. Mine was 6 people, but you are also connected to a larger student body who are all working toward these same goals together, and having, even if they're in different concentrations, they're all having similar struggles, and we're all in that together. And it's pretty celebratory.
Well, as you said, there are classes that you have to attend as well. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about those, because you told me that Western has a core idea that each writer has ultimate authority over their own voice. You called it the Felicia Rose Chavez model, which I love because we love Felicia on this program. So in what ways did you see this idea being implemented in the program?
Yeah, this is an idea I learned from the program. We had a class on pedagogy taught by Dr. Julie Kane, and she brought this book as well as Matthew Celes's Craft in the Real World, just as models of how the workshop model is changing. And I fell in love with Felicia Rose Chavez's book, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop. It really opened my mind. And I could see a shift even from the beginning of my time at Western to the end about how much those sort of concepts have been embraced. But I really think that it's a school pushing away from the 1950s model of there is a teacher who tells you if your poem is good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And moving toward this idea of you are the authority on your work. How does workshop help you? Even how do assignments help you? I mean, I gave you the Sonnet Crown example, but also I had another assignment that I wanted to do something different. And I just talked to my instructor and I said, I'd really like to do this. Is there any way I can make this part of the assignment instead of, X instead of Y? And Maya Jewel Zeller told me every part of this should serve you as a writer. Every part of your school experience should serve your writing life. So if there is something that I've asked you to do and you can think of a way that it'll help you more, you should do that thing. And I wished I'd heard that so much earlier, because I think that there are more opportunities even that I could have taken to raise my hand and say, there's a path I'd like to follow. Can I do this instead? Because I think it will serve my own craft better. And I think that there is just more space being made for those kinds of conversations and decisions.
Well, yeah, it sounds like the program is really supportive to the students who are in it. And one thing that I always have to ask about, especially related to low residency programs, is funding, because it can be a bit tricky with low res programs. So I tried to find on the website if there were any fellowships or scholarships, things like that for students, and I couldn't really find anything. It does seem like the program is really transparent with how much it costs. So if you're thinking about going to Western Colorado, go to their website and look at those prices. But do you know if there are any like funding opportunities for students to attend here?
This is a question I didn't know to ask when I started my program. So I'm really glad you're asking it. It is definitely a space where, like you mentioned, especially low residency programs could be more transparent. And I don't have a lot of information to tell you. I was given a few merit scholarships that I did not apply for and was very grateful for, but did not apply for other opportunities, did not know if they were available to me. I did find out that there are some like research grants that you can apply for. I did not personally do that myself, but the whole process could be more transparent. And there was not anything like a teaching fellowship like you might get in an in-person program.
Well, before we get to the final question that I ask all of the guests, I heard you will be speaking on a panel at AWP soon. So tell us, when is the panel and what's it covering?
The panel is on March 10th at 1:45 p.m. And it is part of a program I was in called Writing the Land. This is a program that pairs poets with protected and conserved lands across the country.
Cool.
And assigns them to write some poems talking about that conservation and that specific land in a way of bringing more attention to the different ways that land is being conserved in this country. Anyway, a couple of the poets who have been a part of that program are on a panel talking about that and using land and landscape as inspiration and about the larger Writing the Land program. And that is the panel I will be on March 10th.
Awesome. Well, I'll be there in Seattle and I'm going to try to come check it out.
You can also find me at the Western table. I would probably be hanging out, just seeing the other, members of the other students and faculty. So I'm sure I'll be there a lot too.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait. And now for that final question, what is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
Sure. I knew this question was coming, and everybody answers it the same way that I have felt, some version of, I literally thought I was going to wash out like you do in the military. I thought there was going to be a moment where somebody said, there are 6 of you now. And by December, there will be 3 of you. Yeah. And, it is not like that at all. But I think a lot of people have mentioned that. So one thing I do want to say is I was floored by how much my writing changed in these 2 years. Just before I started the program, I self-published like a chapbook of my best poems, just for friends and family, just to do it. And I was like, this is the pinnacle of my work. And in 2 years, I went back and I read that, and there's nothing wrong with them, but I was like, this is not the writer I am today. Mm-hmm. And I could not believe that in 2 years, I had not just grown, not like there's like a linear growth process, but just changed and evolved in such a way. And I really credit that intensive MFA experience for giving me that leap forward that brought me to the writer I am today. And I hope there's more growth and evolution in the future, but I think this really helped me sort of put the heat under it and change my writing for the better.
Well, Erica, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for being such a good fan and such a great guest.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed my time today.